Hey guys, welcome. Welcome to today's live video. We're here on Instagram instead of TikTok. What a change. Can you guys hear me, by the way? Good morning, wherever you're from. Good afternoon. If you're anywhere from the East Coast, good afternoon. So we're just going to wait for Brandon to come in. Someone said, yes, we can hear you. Okay. Hello, Nicole. So good morning. How are you guys doing? Chicago. That's awesome. Here in Florida, it's such a beautiful day. Kind of wanted to go outside and spend some time out there. I probably will do that after the live. I'm waiting for my friend Brandon to join us. He's a spiritual teacher and he helps develop psychic abilities, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Is just intuition and how to channel that intuition. So for the time being, just say hi. I know I don't typically go live here. I typically go live on TikTok a lot. But today we're going to be chatting with the people of Instagram. So I'm excited. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So yeah, I'm just waiting for Brandon to come in here and chat. Let me see if I can send an invitation. Hold on. That way we can go ahead and get started. So how are you guys doing today? How's your day going? Are you guys like getting any work done? Are you at work? Are you at the beach? If you're at the beach, I am so jealous of you. I wish I was at the beach right now. But duty calls. Someone said you look so happy. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really am. I really am. I think that sometimes we go through hard times in life and you're just meant to go through them so that you can grow through them. So yes, Brandon's here. Let's go ahead and get started on this intuition live. Hopefully you guys can hear me correctly and everything's okay. All right, let's see. Yes, there we go. It should be. It's not doing it for some reason. Yes!
Woohoo!
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are
I'm
you?
good. I'm good. I was waiting for you. I was like, I wonder if it's like not accepting for a reason. I'm like, oh my God, like I never go live on Instagram. It's usually on TikTok. And I was like, I hope my tech savvy skills don't butcher this.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. Yeah, my earbuds aren't really connecting, but hopefully you can still hear me okay.
No, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hmm.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Your setup is so beautiful. It's so aesthetically pleasing. I love
Uh,
it.
Thank you. I'm literally like in my room. So this
That's
is my
great.
little setup. It's giving very much green vibes. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. It's like kind of grounding, but also like growthful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going for is that grounding like Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn energy. And just like I want people to come into my space and my content and just kind of feel inspired and just feel grounded because I think we
Mhm.
all need that. And I think like in a world where there's just a lot going on to say the least, like the least you could get is like see someone that like replenishes your energy and things like that. It makes you feel like at home, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I'm
So
happy to be invited into that space.
yeah, thank you. So I'm excited to talk about, I don't know if you have any questions that you have planned. I know I have a couple. I know that when I was first starting my spiritual journey and tapping into like my abilities and things like that, I know that intuition, which is what we're going to be talking about today, was really, really important on this journey. And even still, I feel like the lesson recently of intuition has been so important. So you're obviously an expert at that, and everyone who's watching is probably interested in that. So I kind of wanted to ask you, like, what is intuition?
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's great. I had a similar question for you, so that's really fun.
We'll
Um,
exchange.
yeah. Mine's a little bit different, but yeah, intuition to me is knowing something through abnormal means, specifically knowing them through your extrasensory perception. And for me, some people resonate with intuition as more of a body feeling, kind of a gut feeling, something that comes in that way. And some people, they connect to their intuition through a sense of knowingness. They just kind of know what the next thing is. They have a sense as to where to go. Some people connect to their intuition through synchronicities and things that keep showing up in their life as signs, things that are coincidences, but of course they're not. And for me, intuition has largely become very visual. It's been more connected to clairvoyance and looking at energy and seeing it. And you could kind of say that it started that way for me too, because even when I was a young kid, I would see beings that weren't physically there. I would see them
Yeah,
walking around the
yeah,
house in different areas. That's kind of always been my thing. You'll hear some psychics or intuitives say that they saw like colors around people,
yeah.
or things that were maybe a little bit more useful. Mine wasn't that useful as a kid. It was just seeing beings everywhere and hearing them. They could communicate with me as well too. But then over time, as the world kind of told me that that wasn't okay, that that wasn't really a useful thing, that I needed to use my mind and think, and that was the way to be accepted, it started to become more of a body sense,
Mm,
where I was aware of what people were feeling and what they were thinking, and I felt as if my energy, rather than being in me, it was divided, and it would
mm,
go to all these other places where everyone else was, and I could kind of feel my friends or classmates, people around me, and it was really debilitating. It brought in a lot of anxiety,
yeah.
and because I wasn't aware of what I was intuitively picking up on, it felt like more of a problem, more of a curse than a gift. When I learned to actually become conscious of it and become aware of what I was intuitively feeling from the beginning, that's when it became more of a gift and something that could be useful.
Yeah.
So that'd be my answer. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a really elaborate answer. And it's really unique to see people's experience or definition of intuition because I think everyone has such a different like experience. Um, and I've never looked at it that way. Like I think my experience is just different, but it's beautiful to hear that like people define intuition as some people say it's a gut feeling, other people say it's like a vision thing. So it's nice to hear the perspective of everyone in that regard.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Do you want me to ask you my version of that question?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. The way that I was thinking about it, and it just kind of came to me today before I sat down here, is I was thinking a lot of people that I meet, they're going through a big change or a big
Yeah,
awakening in their life, and they're like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, things are shifting. I'm feeling this inclination to be more spiritual,
Hmm.
but they don't necessarily call it intuition, recognize what that is within them, or even totally know why it would be useful to them. So I was kind of curious how you came about your intuitive abilities and what you would have called it when you first encountered it, and then how it became useful for you.
That's a great question too. I love the way you put that instead of just asking, what's intuition for you? Um, so for me personally, similarly to you, ever since I was young, I was able to perceive things that were not maybe physically there with the human eye. And for me, it first began when I was really young. I would get a lot of visions in like my dreams, and then next thing I would know, it's like they would become a reality. But for me, it's more feeling. It's having that gut feeling that tells you something's not right about this, or like, don't do this, or don't do that, or like, don't trust said person, or like said thing that's being said. And for me, over the years, that was really confusing because you you have to be really connected. And I know last time when we spoke privately, for a woman, the intuition lies in her womb, in her sacral chakra. And it's that space of feeling. A lot of people think it's the heart, but what I've discovered for me as a woman is that it's usually my gut feeling is like, it feels like the belly, right? Like people say the gut, but it's because it's like close to the womb. So over the years, I've discovered that when I was a child, when I had this like open imagination and I kind of just allowed myself to be in flow, and my essence is like the more information I would receive. And sometimes I would feel bad because I would meet people and I would receive certain information. And then also being an empath was kind of scary because it's like you said, you start absorbing that energy and then you sit there and you're like, oh my goodness, like, is this mine? Like, I don't know what's mine and what isn't. So for the longest time, I had to like really hone in on my intuition and say, okay, if I drop down into my womb, right, into my sacral chakra, how does this feel? Like, does this come from me or does this come from someone else? And I think that's kind of how I personally developed my intuition. And really, it was put into test recently when I had to make what I think is one of the hardest decisions of my life. And I had to trust that nudge, even if I didn't understand it 100%, because sometimes what the soul can comprehend, the human mind can't. It just can't keep up. It's more of an analytical thing. And I just think for spirituality, there's no analysis. It just is. It's something that has to be experienced. And oftentimes it doesn't have like a valid answer or a real science behind it. It's a feeling. So to me, that's kind of how my intuition started, was seeing things, but the feeling essence of it was a lot stronger for me. And that's kind of how I knew like what to follow, and also to learn to observe my body and how it reacted through that intuition and through those encounters and situations as well. I hope
Mm.
that I hope that
Yeah,
made
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that's really cool. So when you kind of got in, a flow state, you're able to feel it at a body level and receive that
Yeah.
information. And then over time, it sounds like you started to know what was intuitive information versus what was random information, and just that relationship that you cultivated with yourself
Yeah.
and your own inner feeling seems to have grown stronger and stronger over time.
Yeah.
Um,
You're right.
that kind of brings up a follow-up question I have about that then. A lot of people, the other thing that they'll say to me is, well, how do I know if it's just anxiety or if I'm intuitively picking up on something? They don't really know
Yeah.
how to trust that within themselves. They might hear that and think, wow, that's so great that you can do it that way, but what about for me? What about all this other stuff I'm picking up on? One example of that, even for me, is there's certain situations where I'll feel the anxiety or the intense energy of an environment. Like I'm going to the airport later today, and
Yeah.
even before I get there, I'm like, ooh, I can already feel that really kind of ungrounded, intense energy of being in transition and just all the things going on there. And I'm curious just how you discern between the two, intuition versus anxiety.
Again, another great question, because I think this is like the top question that not just me, but a lot of people ask. Like, I know I had this question when I first started too, because it's like there is a thin line between intuition and anxiety. I'm getting chills as I'm saying that. So there's a thin line that we tend to kind of overlook. And I think like what you're feeling, what you're experiencing in the airport is something that's very normal, because I think everything's so interconnected. We're all experiencing the same experience but through different lenses. So it's not that hard to connect to other people. This is why you dream of other people or you think of them and the next thing you know they text you, right? It's not a coincidence. But to go back to your question, the way I've personally discovered the difference between intuition and anxiety in one simple sentence is, one will feel peaceful and the other one will feel chaotic. So when you start developing intuition, and to develop your intuition, there's a misconception that you have to like meditate 5 hours a day and like do this and do this excessive work. And although that's great and that does help hone in and like tune into that frequency and like that outside chatter so you can look within, I'm a firm believer that when you create stress, it creates resistance. And when you create resistance, it's very hard for any sort of channeling. to come through because you're not as open. You're now being hyper fixated on something and then waiting for it to come that way instead of the way it needs to. So the way I explain this to my friends, to, you know, people around me, clients, it's like when it comes from source, when it comes from God, it's intuition, and it usually feels like peace. 90% of the time, even if you don't understand it, you'll sit here and say, I want to do this. I don't know how it's going to go, but my intuition, that feeling, that gut feeling, like when I sit with it, yeah, it can be scary, but if I work past it, I can see that it feels right. I don't know how to explain it. It just feels right. And that's peace. That's peace. When it feels chaotic and when it's not from God and when it's not from source, it'll feel like this wishy-washy energy. You'll be like, oh, I want to do this, but no, I don't. But I have a feeling like something's not right. Like even in anxiety, there's intuition to an extent. So in that phase, in that moment, it's about sitting down and saying, okay, for example, for you, it's like, I have anxiety when it comes to the airport. My intuition's not telling me something's going to happen that's going to be bad or that I'm in danger. It's just anxiety because I have to be in a close-knitted space with a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of energies. And I think that, like, identifying that is very important. And then to take it one step further, let's talk about, like, really quick, a quick example would be dating. Like, let's say you meet someone and you don't necessarily want to go on the date, but then you realize that it's because of anxiety. For example, you don't want to drive the car. You're afraid to, like, be in the closed space. It has nothing to do with that person, actually. It has to do with the circumstances towards meeting that person. Or on the other side, it could be, no, I actually don't resonate with that person and I don't feel like I necessarily want to have an open communication and exchange energies. So this is why it's important to, like, tune in again to that gut feeling in your body to see what actually resonates and what doesn't. But usually it feels like peace is what I tell people. Intuition feels like peace. Anxiety feels like chaos and like doubt. And that's how you can tell one or the other from that.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that. So it sounds like kind of a blend of both practice and then intuition being a more calm, clear message. And then I think you also said something along the lines of becoming aware of where that information's coming from, that feeling. Is it related to just the circumstance or is it related to a deeper message?
Yeah.
And I really like that part because that's what's always helped alleviate that for me as well.
Yeah.
It's like if I can see, okay, here's the energy of maybe, let's just say, you know, this client who's really stressed out and that's why I'm feeling stressed. Or in my airport example, here's the energy of all the people there that are worried about missing their flight or the, you know, whatever it is. And actually calling it out and perceiving that, then I'm like, oh, now I have some space from it. I've heard the message. I don't have to keep that message replaying through my body. I've heard it, and so now I have space from it. It's when that's pressing in and you're like, no, I don't want to feel this. I'm not, you know, this is somebody else's, and you react, then the message keeps being loud because you haven't really received it yet. So I really like that part. That's really cool.
I want to ask you the same question. I want to bounce it back to you and say, what is intuition for? Like, how do you identify intuition and anxiety? Like, what is your experience in regards to that?
Yeah. For me, I might, you know, relate to it slightly differently, where if it's a feeling or a sensation, to me, that's a message that's coming from the body. Whereas for me, intuition, it's usually going to be a sound, a knowingness, or an image. But the information from the body can be in communication to whatever I'm intuiting. So my intuition is picking up on the fact that I'm going to be at the airport. It's sending that image down to my body, you could say, and then my body's responding, going fear, fear, fear. And then intuitively, that's my chance to either say, okay, here's why that fear is being communicated. Good, I have space. Or you're unconscious to it. And I think that's why most people, they don't know how to interpret their own signals, is because we live in such a chaotic world with no space to process or have room. for actually hearing those messages. A lot of people that have big healing tasks in their life, illness, whatever, just having space to process and hear those messages from their body can sometimes be really instrumental. So for me, the intuition is more of the vision of it, and then the feelings are in response to it. But that would be the difference. You know, you could feel anxiety around, like, say, if you're getting into a new relationship, you're like, is this person right for me? Are they, doing something behind my back? And there could be anxiety there. Is that a response from an image of seeing them doing something? Or is that mentally created because you're worrying about it? And that's where it can be a little bit harder to differentiate if you haven't practiced this before, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not used to it. So I always recommend people start small. You don't just go for the big thing right off the bat and, okay, I've never practiced intuition. I'm going to practice it on this, thing that's super
Yeah.
important. I'm like, no, don't do that. Practice it on small things in your day-to-day life. Have a daily practice with it. Practice receiving that information and those messages. And then when the big things come, you'll trust that message so much more.
Yeah.
And so, kind of like we were talking about, where some people that's a gut feeling, for you, there's kind of a womb connection, body energy, calibration there. For some people, it's visual or auditory. Whatever you get it as, when you get those inklings, or even if it's a dream, um, write it down. Just take note of it. You can't track your progress or if you were right unless you take some sort of note of it. And then later on in the day, when you bump into that person or that situation or whatever, you'll be like, okay, that was that feeling that came through and this is what happened. Or this was that feeling that came through and it was totally just my anxiety. It went great. It went amazing. And you
Mm-hmm.
can start to notice the difference.
Yeah. That's actually really, really good. That's perfect, and it goes hand in hand. I think everybody just experiences and has different abilities. I always tell people, like, everyone's intuitive. Everyone has the ability to tap into that and tap into that connection. There's no difference between us and other people, but I do think it's like a muscle. I do think it's something that you have
Yes.
to work on over time. And I think what you have to work on is building that trust within yourself and what you're receiving. And it's so great what you said, because a lot of people experience it as a gut feeling, like as an actual strong feeling. Some people have dreams, some people see things, and some people hear things. And it's so funny because in my past, I've experienced a little bit of everything. Like, if I'm not trusting the feeling, it'll come through a vision. And if I'm not trusting the vision, it'll come through, something being said or an overheard conversation to confirm. But I think it's great. I think it's good for people to know that there's different ways that they can experience intuition.
Yeah, totally. And those messages, they not only come in different ways. If you miss the message, they'll also start to get louder and
Yeah,
louder
yeah,
each
yeah.
time until you really hear it.
That's true. That's so true. I know for me, personally, and also I think sometimes in this journey, we like love to help others, and we're so good at, like, giving other people advice on intuition. It's like, oh, it's so clear for me. Like, it's so clear to me that you need to do this. But then sometimes for ourselves, it's kind of hard, which, if you don't mind, I want to ask you this question is like, how do you know, like, for example, the question is like, how do you apply your own intuition? Like, when you're faced with a challenge, let's say, and you have to make a decision, like, how do you know it's your intuition? And also, how do you know to trust that, and like that's the right choice, I guess you could say also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I have a somewhat similar answer to just how you're trusting intuition in general when it comes to how to trust it for a decision, kind of in the way that I was saying, practice small, and then when the big stuff come, you'll have that practice. But I guess to kind of go further with that point, for me personally, I have a meditation practice where I go in and I actually turn down my body level senses. I calm the nervous system, I turn down the emotions, all of the other things that could kind of make noise, get in the way, have an opinion. I actually practice turning that down. And then I visually see like a whiteboard out in front of me, 3 or 4 feet out in front of my forehead. And on that whiteboard, I can ask any question that I want, and spirit will communicate to me in images. It'll show me that image, some sort of answer will come through. And some people, they'll think, oh, I have a really hard time visualizing. Yeah,
Hmm.
everybody does at first, because like you said, it's a muscle. You got to strengthen it. So at first, it might be kind of blurry, but there's some sort of perception that you're getting from that image anyway. And even if you're having a reaction, like say I'm trying to make, I'll give you a real example. I had moved to, have this new job, and I left a really like good, sure deal job for this other one because I intuitively felt it was right. But then once I got there, I was getting this sense within me that I needed to quit, that I needed to leave. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of a big deal because I just did all this work to get here. And so I sat, I calmed everything down within me in meditation, and I looked at that board and I asked to see the energy of what would happen if I left. And I just looked at it from a neutral standpoint. And then I asked to see the energy of what would happen if I stayed. And so for me, I could visually see the two paths and what it would look like energetically, what it would look like for my spiritual path, taking my ego out of it, not saying, okay, what does my ego think would be more fun? What's going to be easier? But rather, what does spirit want for me? What's going to be my highest growth, my highest good? And that can be a little bit hard because we,
Yeah.
have attachments. And so
Yeah.
releasing attachments is a big part of trusting your intuition too. But anyway, so for me, I visually saw that. But for people listening that want to try this, you might get a sense where you're kind of tuning into one energy and you feel some frustration. You feel this sense of like claustrophobia. Then you look at the other and
Yeah.
it feels like relaxation, freedom. And so you don't necessarily want to always just be guided by your desire and what feels 100% right unless you tune in that feeling to what the intuitive message is. If you're just going about your day and you're totally in your ego and you say, well, what feels more fun? Yeah, quitting my job might feel more fun in that moment, and then you end up in a bad situation. But when you take the time to just calm yourself for a moment and actually, intend to see that energy, then you can tune into those feelings and what's coming up for you, whichever way you're perceiving it, and you'll have more clear guidance there. And so for me, I just, it was clear which one was the right choice, even though it was actually the most scary
Yeah.
choice and the one my ego
Yeah.
pushed back against the most. And I chose it and it worked out and it benefited me 5 times more than anything I could have imagined and worked out way better. And so then when 4 years later I had to make a similar decision, I was like, okay, I know which one it is. I
Hmm.
know how to trust this. I know how to follow through since I followed through before. And when I committed to that follow through, everything worked out.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of my process around that.
That's so powerful. I'm letting the words like be processed and hit because what it sounds like and what I heard is that oftentimes what we have to do intuitively lies on the other side, what makes our ego feel uncomfortable. Is that one hit me because a lot of the times the choices that I've had to make out of intuition, even if I knew intuitively they felt right and I could feel them in my body, it was very uncomfortable for me because it was either unknown, uncertain, and I think that the ego has such a way of being so attached to certain outcomes, said people, said situations. And intuition is just, like you said, very neutral. It's looking at things from a neutral perspective and pretty much assessing like what's best, not even just for ourselves, but for also like everyone involved where with the situation, because I think that's what it is intuition takes into account not just yourself, yes, what's right for you, but also what's right for everyone involved in the highest, light. So I think it's very, very interesting that you said that because that's going to make a lot of sense to a lot of people of saying, okay, when I'm forced to make a decision, oof, I feel some sort of like resistance towards that.
Mhm.
And it's because the ego. So that might be a way for them
Yeah.
to also tell and
Yeah.
process that.
Totally. Yeah, if you always want to feel comfortable, you're not going to be able to make those big choices and those big
Mm-hmm.
steps. You know, intuition can sometimes feel like jumping off a cliff and seeing where you wind up. And sometimes we even forget to celebrate the wins when we
Yeah,
trust our intuition, because sometimes it takes a while, you know,
yeah,
before things manifest, before they play out. And a lot of people sabotage themselves because they take a step in trusting their intuition. They don't see the immediate result, or they get a little bit uncomfortable and they think, oh, this must not have worked. I must have steered
yeah,
wrong. And they take a step back. But little did they know they were inches away from that breakthrough happening,
yeah,
whether it's an inner breakthrough in their world. And so, you know, for me, part of being a psychic or part of being intuitive is being comfortable with uncomfortable things.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say that too, is like part of being such an intuitive person is trusting yourself and what you receive and the information. And now I kind of want to ask this question because it's really interesting. But like when you are channeling, right? Like, because channeling is part of intuition. And you made a point where you said you have to make sure you're doing things from a neutral perspective. And to me, that's a very important subject because I've met people and I've experienced hearing certain said channelings when maybe it might not be so much channeling because the neutrality point of that is not there. So I wanted to ask you is like, how can someone be neutral while they're channeling so that the intuitive side of things and the messages are actually coming from a neutral standpoint, not so much of an ego and experience-based information. If I
Mm,
hope I worded that okay.
yeah, yeah, no, that made perfect sense. And there's a really long answer to that. I have a very like straightforward, like mechanical step-by-step process to help anyone be able to do that. But my sort of shorter answer is we're perceiving information, whether it's channeled or otherwise, through our own lens of how we see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a whole bunch of you know, I call them mental pictures, but just different beliefs, right, about how the world works, how it's supposed to be. You have a certain framework of like intellect, vocabulary that you can draw from. So whether you're channeling, you know, a healing being or whether you're channeling yourself and your own information, to be able to communicate it, put it into words, it's getting processed through your analytical mind and through all of those different beliefs, filters of our own vision of what we see. And so a clear channel, they're going to be able to step out of their own filters, their own blind spots, and just let that come through. And that takes some practice. That's a little bit of a
Yeah.
longer answer as to how to do that. At a body level, you know, we have a lot more say over our emotional state and over our physical bodies, energies than what we're told. You know, most people are told that they're just kind of a victim to their environment, whatever's going on within their life, their
Yeah.
situations, that determines how they feel. That determines how jarred up they are, or what they ate's going to determine, you know, how they're feeling. But you actually have a lot more control over those inner mechanisms than you'd be led to believe. And so that's kind of a longer answer too. But I would say that most people, just right off the bat, a way that they can access that is through being able to put their own opinions to the side. And
Yeah.
that's kind of turning off that mental aspect, turning down that filter. And so for me, how you do that is by getting into your intuitive part of your brain. You get into the creative part. And so for me, that's visualizing. If I'm looking at things in an image, visuals, then my mind doesn't have
Yeah.
anywhere to go. It's not allowed to do anything because I'm just seeing an image. So for me, I start with an image of a rose. That's kind of my divination tool. And so I allow the energy of whatever I'm trying to look at come into that rose, and it characterizes it, it brings it to life, it brings color into it, it brings structure into it. And then I look at that the way that some natives might look at, you know, a crystal or, you know, tarot cards. There's various divination tools. For me, it's visual because then, yeah, like I said, the mind is gone. I'm intuitive. And then once I'm in that state, the information can start to come in. And if I start to have an opinion, I'm starting to give advice, I'm starting to should on somebody else, telling them what they should do, anything like that, I'll go, oh, nope, that's my own perception, my own opinion getting in the way. Let's turn that down by going back to the basics, back to visualizing, letting the colors come in, the images, all of that. If you're just watching it and being an interpreter for what you're seeing, rather than giving your opinion about it, then it's neutral. Same for if you're feeling it, same if you're knowing it, hearing it, all those other ways. If you're just interpreting what's coming in rather than opinionating it, boom, there you go.
That's a good answer. That's a great answer for people to meditate on because, in a world right now where there's so many channelers and so many people giving messages, sometimes they can get lost. And sometimes when we begin to channel and use our intuition, sometimes we go into this autopilot and sometimes we forget that inside of that is our own opinions and how much of what we're channeling is part of our belief system and our opinions. And like you said, the should or the should thing, right? We're shoulding people. We're saying, well, you should do this. And it's like, when we cross over to that line, it's like at the end of the day, everyone has a unique experience. And it's like, we can't tell them what to do. We can interpret exactly like you said, like beautifully said, from a neutral perspective, the energy and, hey, this is what it is. But at the end of the day, it's their choice. And that's just very powerful. The neutral point to me is very, very powerful, and something that recently more than ever now is what I've been working on, is making sure that my channelings and what I'm helping or trying to portray to people is as neutral as it can get. And I think that that's something really important.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that kind of brings me, I have a couple questions I wanted to ask you, and then I saw there was a question in the comments too that I'd like to
Yeah.
answer still here. Um, but my question is, so recently you had to kind of use your intuition to make a big decision and a big life change. And we don't have to
Yeah.
go into that, but I'm kind of curious because it's a blend of both of the things we're talking about. A, how did you be able to access your intuition for a big decision? But B, maybe more so what I'm curious about is when it's super emotional for you and there's a lot of charge behind it, that may be one of the harder times
Yeah.
to access that neutral point. I'm curious how that went for you, what that looks like.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's actually something I've gotten asked about recently because I was asked to take a very strong and very unknown leap of faith. Anytime you leave something behind, whether it be a relationship, a job, a friendship, or even said patterns about yourself, they're going to feel uncomfortable, like super uncomfortable. And for me, because I'm such a feeling person, because I have such a defined sacral chakra in human design, which that can be another live we do later on. But for me, it's very important to feel everything and feel, because through that is where my intuition is for me personally. And the feeling, like you said, is not just linked with a feeling. It usually comes with something I'm perceiving or seeing mentally. And then it's being manifested as a feeling because that's the way I identify what to do. It's like if it doesn't ignite my soul and it doesn't make me feel or bring me that sense of peace and effortless, like ease, then it's not for me. It's not. And I think for me personally, one of the challenging things is like my ego. My ego wants this situation to be this way because it's what's comfortable. But my soul is telling me that this is not the situation for me. And the reason being is because I am not I don't feel as in alignment with
Mm.
this situation. I feel like it's throwing me off more than it's bringing me peace. And I think over the course of time, what I've realized is when you're around the right people in the right situations, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have ups and downs because, we're here to experience the human experience. But you also shouldn't be having constantly downs, if that makes sense. Just feel like you're hitting this pit. So for me, I had to, my intuition, that's the crazy thing, is like my intuition was telling me for months, like
Mm.
through numbers, through people, through messages, whether I was looking for them or not. It's like God and the universe were like, no, like here's this. all right, you didn't get that? Let me send you another one. So I already knew intuitively, and this is where sometimes it's funny, but I want to be honest, is like we know already the outcome of certain things, or at least what we should do on a deep soul level. But sometimes because the ego is so at play, like you said, we still hold on to those things. And then we find ourselves in these like low vibrational situations, which is part of life. It's how we learn, right? But for me, I just knew for months when I would sit and meditate and like quiet the outside chatter and what other people thought and what people were telling me, and even what I was seeing and what was coming up to my experience to be experienced, I knew in my heart when I dropped down that that was not the life I wanted to live. That was not the situation. That was not the person. That was just not even the feeling I wanted to experience. And walking away from that was hard, of course, because not only do you have a lot of love for people and for certain situations, but at the same time, it all goes back to your own intuition, to your own self-love, and what you're choosing to experience at this time, whether your ego deems it as comfortable or uncomfortable. And like you said beautifully, to me, a sign that I should do something is if it scares the crap out of me. Because then that means that there's growth outside of that decision. And that is what my soul needs at that time. And that's kind of how I made the decision too, and really tuned in and, like you said, quieted that mind. And when I would sit down, being really honest, I would see on my mind's eye, not like a board like you, but I would see images and I would feel the feelings of that which I was seeing and say, wait, this is not the same feeling at all. Like this feels very opposite. And when I would see these things from a very neutral standpoint, I would see something completely different. I would see a different person. I would see myself older or younger, or all these things where it would direct me towards the right path and, allowed me to use my intuition. And again, I hope that makes sense because I'm trying to speak from the heart and from the experience. But yeah, it was tough. It was tough. But I think when you work through your emotions and you have the tools necessary to kind of like scope out what's yours and what's not yours, then the intuition kicks in times 1,000 and you can make these hard decisions in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it totally made sense. To me, that's like essentially a way of saying that the message as to the, direction you needed to go was louder than the information of, everything else that needed to be held back. And you kept getting that kind of reinforced or reinformed that it was the right choice. It wasn't like you just had to jump instantly at the first time. It's like you got to kind of sit with that and feel that and experience that in a few different ways before you really had to make that choice. So that's cool. Some people, they'll sit with that forever and not make the choice. And some people, they'll jump, right off the first piece of information. And I like that kind of idea that you had some balance with it. It wasn't a hasty decision, but it also wasn't something that you're just going to prolong until it feels so impossible you can't even do it. Yeah, it's great. There's a question in the chat I wanted to answer, and then maybe just one more that I wanted to ask you too. But the question here was, how does recent trauma affect intuition, and also chronic illness affect intuition? And maybe I'll say something about it first, and then you can chime in too if you'd like. I find that recent trauma can affect intuition in two ways. Sometimes it can actually amplify it because you had to use your intuitive abilities to get out of that traumatic situation. And so your senses are kind of heightened. At the same time, that recent trauma, you might be replaying that in your head over and over again. So you're trying to be intuitive about other things, and the loud voice of that trauma is kind of encroaching on you. And so sometimes it can be hard to feel like you can trust your intuition again when you're so jarred by whatever that trauma was that happened. And so being able to regulate and heal your nervous system and then tap back into that intuition is kind of the process for that. And yeah, feel free to message either one of us if you want some help with that more directly. Not that you were necessarily referring to yourself anyway, but yeah. And then as far as chronic illness goes, I see a similar thing. Where some chronic illnesses can be a big message that's trying to be conveyed, something that's trying to be healed. And so sometimes you have to access your intuition in order to be able to get an answer to heal that chronic illness, right? Because chronic means that it's been lasting a really long time. You've had it for 10 years or so. Why does something stick around? You're either healing something that's not yours, and so it can't be resolved, and you just got to let it go, or you haven't learned the lesson in it. It hasn't taught you what it needed to yet. There's still something to uncover in that that's keeping it as part of your path. So I would say that with chronic illness, yeah, if you're like totally sick and conked out, it might be hard to access that intuition if you're identified with being your body. I know for a long time I had chronic pain and inflammation, and my body wasn't absorbing nutrients, and I had mold toxicity, all these things to where my brain was almost like it wasn't functioning very well. I couldn't remember where I was an hour ago, but I realized that intuition comes from spirit, and my spirit is not confined or restricted to my body. And so despite being in a state that I would consider chronic illness, I was able to still use my intuition. I was able to still do readings, and I was able to kind of find answers for myself that gradually helped move me out of it. And I've seen that for people as well. So I would say it's just important in the chronic illness game. How it's actually affected is, yeah, it varies from person to person.
Wow, whoever asked that question, that was really good. That was really good because I agree with a lot of what you said. And to add on to it, and this comes from my experience, it's, when you go through a said trauma, it does affect the way that you trust your intuition. And the reason for me personally is because my intuition probably told me already about said person a long time ago or said situation. And I decided with my ego, it's fine, right? We're going to test it out. We're going to completely like disregard that, and we're just going to go. And I think when you go through the trauma, when you didn't listen to your intuition is really when people then become to have a wound or begin to have a wound with their intuition, because they're like, well, is it right? I didn't listen to it that last time, and then it ended up being right. So then you have like this unbalance or almost like this resentment towards intuition in a way, because you're like, well, my intuition tells me this, but if I cut someone so quickly, it's like I'm gonna end up alone for the rest of my life, right? Or then you stick through it, and then the situation becomes an experience, a lesson learned, and then we might then become a little afraid of our intuition because we're like, oh well, or hard on ourselves. Why didn't I listen? Why did I put myself through this situation? So to me, I think trauma does affect, but you have the power, like you said, to not allow said experiences or things disconnect you from your intuition or from your inner knowing or that power. And you can always call it back to you and your ability to listen to the intuition. And for me, I get it because I've gone through a lot of trauma, as I'm sure all of us have. We've all had our fair share of traumas. But I think once you heal and you realize, if anything, like you said, it makes your intuition 10 times stronger because now you learn the lesson. And I always say there's two ways that can go from here. You either build resentment towards intuition because you didn't listen to it upon initiation, or you develop this strength because then you say, okay, here's what not to do next time. Like, here's what this feeling feels like. And that is my intuition. So now I know better, and now I can move forward with more certainty because now I have more of a feeling in a direction. And I think that would be my answer. Again, hoping it makes sense. And then in regards to illness and intuition, like you said, I actually think, and again, my opinion is, I do think intuition is linked with the way we feel. Because a lot of the times we can't intuit, like at least we can't use our intuitive abilities if we're not centered, but you don't necessarily need your body to do that. However, to me, as an embodiment coach and as an embodiment healer, the first thing I look at someone is, or in a session or whoever is what is physically being manifested in the body, because any sort of disease lets me know that there is an uneasiness within them. And it usually, like you said, can stem from many different things that people hold on to. And again, I don't think that this prevents you from using your intuition. Excuse me, because like you said, we're all, you know, we're souls. So we're able to detach at any point and receive this information. It's not like we need our body to be restricted. But at the same time, it's very important to balance that and to be aware so that we're able to channel better and come from that neutral standpoint. I think the balance is very important, and that does involve having no disease and, you know, making sure that your body is like in tip-top shape in that sense. Because it is to me, it's a manifestation of how your soul feels and how you feel within your soul as well. Yeah. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. There was some really good golden nuggets in there. I'm like, I need to go back and re-listen to that again. There was some really, yeah, great points that you touched on in that. I think that's great. I know some intuitives that are very strict about like having no coffee, no chocolate, nothing that'll affect their nervous system, because they just want to be really like clean and pristine. They always get enough sleep, that sort of a thing. And so, yeah, there's something to be said about that. You know, being healthy might make it a little bit easier at times to access that, or it might be a little bit more fun, because if you're tapping into your intuition, but you're hearing all of these messages of pain and illness, you know, that's kind of intense.
Yeah.
I've been there, done that a lot. Yeah, those are some great points. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. For me personally, like when I channel a lot, like I just did an event on Sunday, wonderful event, and it was like 20 readings back to back, and they were only 15 to 20 minutes, but it was just so much. And I knew that if I ate personally like any heavy food, it would not, it wouldn't necessarily be as flowy, right? Because my brain would be too busy digesting. And it's the same thing that we practice in yoga. I would never eat before I do my yoga practice, because why? It kind of disconnects you from that blissful state. And I'm not advocating not eating. I'm just saying, like, for me, juices would be it. Like when I do events like that, or like big sessions or things like that, I try, just because that's just the way my body is. And if not, then obviously I replenish my body and make sure to do that. But yeah, there is a truth to that to an extent, because everyone's different. I mean, I have friends that don't care. They'll have coffee, they'll smoke a cigarette before, you know, everyone's different. But just for me, I know I can't. I know I feel too heavy and too grounded, when maybe I need to be a little more not grounded and up there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny because I know a psychic who actually drinks while giving readings. He likes to be more unconscious when he's letting information go in, and that's kind of wild to me. I had a month where I only ate steamed potatoes because I was having such a hard time digesting anything, and my readings were amazing that month. They were so clean and clear and easy. And at the same time, you know, I've had readings where I had a really, really important one coming up, and then I ate something and totally had an allergic reaction, was completely inflamed and feeling like I was going to be unconscious. And so I have tools to work with that too, to be able to turn that down, because a big part of what I practice and teach my students is to be able to use their intuition and use their spiritual tools in general in any setting, whether they're on a subway station, whether there's something going wrong digestively, or even, you know, outside of their body in the afterlife. One of the only things you get to take with you from this world is your spiritual gifts and growth. And so, yeah, you know, while there's kind of like an ideal state or something that makes it better and perfect, I try to mix it up and not get attached to that too. Every once in a while, I'll do readings when I'm like on the go or in a new environment. Anytime I travel, I usually end up doing lots of reading and healings to the local people, because I like to see, you know, the energy of new cultures, and I like to practice using my gifts in places where I'm totally unfamiliar and I can't control everything. That way, it comes back to me to be able to hold hold that space and make that happen. So
I love that. That's so true. That actually brought up something I just remembered too. Like, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but when I do a lot of readings, and I absorb a lot of energy, because when you're exchange, it's an exchange of energies. I always tell people you're like dancing with someone. And for me, I've noticed that a lot of the times when I do way too many readings, or I've been around people way too much as an empath and an intuitive, my solar plexus begins to be blocked because there's so much energy that later on I have to go and dump or transmute, because there's always an exchange. I always tell people, always. And this is the way we channel, is through feeling and through like being receptive through things. And for me, I've noticed that in events like this, when it's so much energy, not just from what you're reading, but like the people that are there. On Sunday I walked out and my belly felt like really, really strong. And it also felt like there was like stuck energy. I could feel it. And I went outside and I had to do like sunbathing to let go of all the using the energy of the sun to release, and chanting and all that stuff, and detoxing through juices and things like that, because the energy does sometimes get stuck, and it's normal, right? We got to get rid of it. But I just thought that was a weird, interesting observation that I wanted to ask if you ever experienced that. Because, when you work with so many people, there's so
yeah.
much. And even from the food you eat, there's so much energy that you ingest through that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have an answer to it, and it kind of leads into the question I was going to ask you too, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
It's like we're in sync or something here. This is great.
Look at that.
For me, I actually experienced that in reverse. And so I have a specific practice and meditation I do to set up boundaries. And since mine, for me, it's more visual than feeling, I really am looking at it more so than taking it in. And so I actually don't feel too much depletion or absorption of it afterwards, but I do feel it before. When I sit
Yeah.
down to meditate and set up for the whole space, that's when I can feel all of the pain and energy from all the different clients. And again, it comes back to that same thing of like, if I'm trying to go about my day and do other things, that feeling can be really intense and suffocating. And I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, okay. But if I sit down and I meditate and I kind of look and I'm like, okay, here's person number one, person number two, and I see like, oh yeah, that's their stuff. That's what's going to come up in the reading.
Yeah.
Then I get some distance from it. I'm like, okay, now it's fine. Now I can just look at it. Because my readings actually start the night before. In my dream space, I'll dream about the reading in some level or another. Sometimes it's very direct, like tick for tack reading. Sometimes it's more of a conversation. Sometimes there's even the scenery of the dream plays into it. But in some way, that reading will already happen ahead of time. Like most things do, happens ahead of time on the dream level. We're just not conscious of it. So anyway, yeah, I wake up and I'm starting to feel it and processing it and looking at it, which leads into my question, because even though I was born with an ability to see spirits around me and my intuitive gifts were, somewhat open, I think I told you the story of when I was 15 and my therapist was giving me Reiki and my eyes were closed and I could draw the symbols that she was doing. And that was when I kind of knew I was, seeing things and being psychic. But for me, it was still very much like, what's the word? It was still kind of a burden. It was still something that I didn't really know how to work with, and that was very overwhelming. And there was a certain level that I was able to tap into it just naturally, having a container. When I went to like Reiki practice spaces, I could tap into it naturally, and because there was just permission for it to be there in that environment. It was allowed. It was okay. I didn't have to repress it. But then sometimes in my day-to-day life, it was still overwhelming until I took a more traditional psychic training route where I actually learned really specific meditative visual tools to have a really like grounded and clear, straightforward practice. And that's what I teach today, running an intuitive school and mentoring people. And I don't know, I just get the sense that you've had a little bit more of a natural unfolding of your abilities and the way in which you harness them and use them. And so I was really curious just how that played out for you and how that looks, maybe taking a different route to get there.
Yeah. Really quick, not to interrupt, but as I was listening to you, I went on a little bit of a trance, and you have purple energy around you, like around your aura, very strongly. So I felt like pointing that out because it's always interesting to see things. So yes, I actually had a very, very different journey, I guess you could say. I didn't really go through or to any school or develop or even had a mentor, which I would have loved. I kind of just, I always tell my parents, like, and they always tell me ever since I was young, I was just naturally seeing things. And sometimes actually when I was young, my parents literally thought that there was something, wrong with me. Not that they were not open to this. Like obviously they practice the law of attraction and they have more of a
Mm.
Buddhist background. So they were aware of these things. But I remember when I was young, I would just see things, hear things, especially through dreams. And I would see things a lot more because when you're young, your third eye is just more open. You're more, connected because there's less of that resistance or those preconceived notions and beliefs. So you're more in turn free. But to me, when I was young, I didn't really do anything to develop it. I just kind of allowed for things to come naturally. And then I always say, and this gets me emotional, the people who trained me are my ancestors
Mm.
because a huge part of my spirit team here on earth are really my ancestors. And I do know that I was fortunate enough to meet them in person, like in person, and also in the astral, in the 5D consciousness, right? In the energy realm. And that's where I got a lot of the clairvoyance and clairaudience and developed over time. And I didn't really start developing till I was like 16, fully really accepting that. But I remembered, and I'll never forget this, my intuitive ability started to kick in. I had an experience a long time ago when I was around 9 to 10 years old. We had just moved to the United States and from Puerto Rico. And I had this dream where I saw this beautiful being. And it wasn't a dream. It was very much you know, an astral projection is what I like to say. And this being appeared, and I remember getting so scared, even though I felt peace, I felt so scared, and it just disappeared. And never again did I ever see that being. Never again did I understand what it actually meant. And then fast forward to about 6 to 7 years later, when I turned around 17 or so, after this experience, of course, I experienced things in between intermittently. And I would say things to my parents, and then the next thing you would know, they would happen. And my parents would joke around and say, oh, P is psychic, or there's something there, right? So we would always joke around, and my family was aware of it. I was very sensitive to energies, like things such as Halloween and like all of these things would really affect me because I knew that there was more than what was being perceived. So fast forward 7 years later, my mom and I go through this massive, massive spiritual awakening, both of us at the same time, but in different ways. And I remember getting this dream of saying, God is coming. And I'm not a religious person at all. But I just had that dream. And all of a sudden, it's almost like everything just woke up. And the next day, I started getting confirmation of the beings that I had seen. And I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like my life flashed before my eyes. And like a book, I can see all the things that I had, you know, seen when I was young. I had it channeled when I was young, and I didn't even know I was channeling. And I could just see it playing like a book. And that book got like processed into me. And then that's when I started realizing that I was not crazy, and I figured out who was in my dream that one time, or my dream. So I think a lot of my training, I guess you could say, really came very naturally from source. And I'm not saying that, if you train with someone, it doesn't come from source. It does. But for me, it was very much as a life path 7, I had to go through it on my own, because my life purpose here is to become that for others. So there was no one training me. I had to train myself through source and then be that for others.
Mm.
And that was ironic because, now I really understand when people say I feel lost. I don't know what to do. It's like, I've been there. I know what that's like. So it came more of a natural approach. And it also came in nudges of things that I really was interested in doing and that worked out for me, things that didn't work out for me. And of course, I took courses also, but I can't say I had someone like yourself that really trained me and that had that and took me under their wing, because I just really didn't. But as time went on and I communicated more and more with my guides and my ancestors, I mean, the connection was just there and everything was very led. And it helped a lot during my progression on this journey, a lot. I hope that explains
Yeah.
that.
Sure. That's a great answer. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey. That's really cool to hear about and gives us just a much deeper sense of knowing you.
Yeah.
It's like where I had to work really hard for it, whereas you're just special. You're
No,
I'm just joking.
no.
I'm just joking. No, I'm just totally kidding.
It's so
But it
funny.
sounds like really though there was a level of permission where some people are really conditioned not to go into that and not to allow their gifts to come forth. You had a little bit of permission there around that, and then part of it was a download for you, and then
Yeah.
from there, it was working with your one-to-one connection to source and your guides and spirit,
Yeah.
and really allowing that process to come through. And it kind of reminds me of something that I think it was Ram Dass that said of like, the guru isn't the person, the guru is everyone, the guru is everything. And some people on their phase of their spiritual journey, they do need a physical teacher. They do
Yeah.
need somebody there to teach them. It doesn't have to be a guru. It could just be a teacher that's, pointing them to look in a certain direction. Whereas other people, they're at a different part in their spiritual journey, and that
Yeah.
teacher doesn't have to be physical. That teacher can come from spirit. And so, just knowing you and seeing that you're an older soul, it makes sense that on your part of the journey, you didn't need that physical teacher in the same way. You were able to get that from everything else that you described. So I think that's really beautiful, and I hope people enjoy getting to see kind of two different paths to get there, two different ways of what that can look like. So,
Yeah, both paths are very successful and they worked because I think everyone's very unique. And I think for me personally, my like it started really early. I just don't think my soul was ready for it. So that's why I kind of rejected that. And then afterwards it just kind of turned into something. But like for example, I do tarot and or tarot, like some people like to call it. And nobody taught me. A lot of people ask me like, "Oh, well, where'd you learn? Like, what course did you take?" And it's like, I didn't take a course. I really just I remember like just getting my being so drawn to my tarot cards. And the first ones were a gift from my grandma and my mom
mm,
actually. And I just really knew intuitively what to do. Because to me, tarot, even though it has an actual meaning, it's more intuitive. It's just a representation of certain energies. Everything else you're perceiving is just a representation. And to me, I really enjoy the art of tarot, and I say that because to me it's an art. But you don't have to use that. That's not always being used. I'm actually evolving into not using those anymore just because I don't feel called to. But it was beautiful to be able to experience that, as I'm sure similarly to you, the Reiki came to you very natural because not everyone sees those things and those symbols. And I just find it very interesting because I think everyone evolves at their own time. And one of the biggest things that I've been working on is knowing that there's so much wisdom, but like trusting myself the most has been my biggest lesson in life. Is because I always felt like I was like, wow, source forgot about me. Like here's everyone getting all this training and
mm,
I'm just over here having to
mm,
figure it out on my own. And then I realized, well, if I have to figure it out on my own, that means it's because I have it within me already. So I just have to like reawaken it, like wake up. And it was one of those processes where I had to. And as I'm sure it wasn't easy, but I wanted to ask you and bounce the question back to you is like, how was your experience like genuinely having someone that could help and took you and seeing all those Reiki symbols, like how has that played a huge role as to who you are now on your spiritual journey?
Yeah, that's a cool question. Um, for me, it was like my soul was crying out for this information and for those answers, and it was just begging for them and trying to reach at them every place that it could. And I feel like source and my guides and guidance came through the people in my life in a really major way. And so everything was kind of just like given to me in a way, in like totally mysterious ways that you would never suspect. Like this is kind of a vulnerable, weird thing to share for me, but the therapist and the person who's giving me Reiki, who ended up being like a total angel onto my life, I was actually court appointed to see her. I had gotten in some trouble as like a freshman in high school, like a 14-year-old, and somehow I landed just in the right spot in the court system to where they're like, all right, we're going to actually get you help rather than just punishment and sending you in the wrong direction. And thank God for that. Thank God for that person who had a higher level of awareness around that system and was doing good work. And so, yeah, that was the first person that came in and made a really huge difference for me.
Wow.
And then she connected me with a Reiki teacher. And then ultimately, she connected me to a boys' home where there was a really wonderful person who ran that space too, who's very, very spiritual and had a lot of insight and teachings for me too. And so he kind of mentored me due to just need for where I was at in my life. And from there, a psychic who was running an institute gave everyone in that home a reading. And when she was reading me, she's like, yeah, this kid needs this work. And so it really found me. I was calling out for it, begging for it, but it found me and drew me in. And so having that high level mentorship and training and support, it was important because I was, kind of a young kid out on my own and, creating a lot of trauma for myself, honestly. And so having somebody to kind of reel me back in, like I wanted it so much that it was the only thing that kind of kept me sane and kept me going in a good direction because I wanted that development for myself more than all of my inner demons wanted me to go in a different direction and to pull me down.
Yeah.
And, I'm lucky in the work that I do. It's not so much a traditional style of teaching or mentorship. It actually goes in hand with something that you said that I found really beautiful, that it's within you and you just have to remember it. And the premise for the work that I do is exactly that. We don't teach you anything new. We show you the ways to remember who you are and to access that information and gift that's already within you. And so it was really just holding space and giving some direction for me to be able to wake up to all of that. And so it was really great because I had someone kind of looking out for me, offering a second set of eyes, pointing me in the right direction when I steered wrong, and even having like a sense of community too.
Yeah.
It gave me a lot of real life experiences that were cultivating to my growth and understanding and learning. And maybe the biggest part about my training and the training I provide for others is that we have a practice space where people practice healing, they practice reading, and they make that practice not so that they can be amazing, perfect at giving, but so that they can learn from each and every person that comes through. Each person gets to act as a mirror for themselves so they can see that deeper shadow work that would be too hard to look at just on their own. You get to see that in that reflection. And through giving to others, you get to do your inner work. And then through your inner work, that's how you contribute to others. It's a fun paradox that works really well together. Would be my answer to that.
That's beautiful. That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that because I know that there is a lot of value and a lot of vulnerability in that. I think a lot of us who have gone through this awakening and this experience, this remembrance, come from a very traumatic time because I know for me also there was a lot of trauma too. This is how I dove head deep into this and not even wanting to. I think even for you, it was just, yes, your soul wanted it, but it just came so naturally because it was destined for you. The same way that it also was destined for me in that sense to walk this path because it is a choice at the end of the day. Not everyone walks this path, at least when it comes to soul purpose and career, I guess you could call it. But I think that for me, what really made me or impacted me about your story was the part whenever you said like we're just here to reawaken and remember, like remember who we are. I remember a long time ago, I was in Sedona in Arizona, and I was, you know, in a very, very altered state of consciousness, just very blissful, very peaceful. And I remember hearing this voice because I had been connecting to source, and I'm like, God, you know, give me eyes to see things for what they are. Not what I want them to be, but what they actually are. And I heard this voice, I'll never forget it. And it said, you're not here to become anything. You're here to remember. And that shook my core so much because it's significantly influenced the way I've changed my soul purpose, my mission here to help other people or just to be here. And I don't no longer live in that stress of like, there's so much I need to do. It's like, no, I just need to be, I need to remember. And once I remember, things will naturally fall into place. I will align with the right people and I will help as much as I can. And you're absolutely right when you say, in other words, is always a student, never a teacher. And my teacher used to tell me that. My yoga teacher used to tell me that. Always a student, never a teacher. And when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it's so funny because that's it. It's just remembering. And I think we're all just walking each other on the path and helping each other remember and, you know, helping each other become the best version of ourselves, because that's really what we're here for. And I always say healing is the journey of a lifetime. Healing is something that you're always going to do, regardless of whether you want to or not. It's going to come up. Life is what happens in between, and that's what we also came here to experience. And I think we experience a lot of that when we interact with others, because there's a piece of them that we can use for ourselves. And that helps grow the intuition. It's all so interconnected. This is why I love it so much, because it's all so connected. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's great. Yes, so much fun having this conversation.
I
I feel
know.
like we could talk for hours and hours and unpack that and that whole
Yeah.
human journey. But since we're kind of coming to, more than an hour, I wanted to ask, knowing that just what your gifts are and what you do, where can people find you and what are you offering right now? How are you working with people? What does that look like?
Oh, this is a great question. It's a question that makes me like, what do you call, like, I feel the energy and the excitement. You know, I primarily focus on embodiment is really what I've decided to go the route in. Whether you want to call that like, you know, a physical hunch on intuition, but really I work on being an embodiment healer, helping people connect to their body so that they can connect to their intuition and basically heal their traumas, heal the shadow aspects, heal the sides of them that could potentially be holding them back from reaching their true potential, right? Because there's always like a light side of us and there's also a shadow side of us. And both of these energies need to be integrated in order to reach, balance in a balanced state. And that's what I do is I help people balance themselves, the feminine embodiment, especially for women and their sacral chakra and their womb is tuning into that intuition and just helping people walk this journey, whatever questions they have in regards to their spiritual journey and, feeling lost to things like that, like we talked about. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much what I do.
Mm.
And I love creating content to help people and just to talk and to just spread light. You know, I always say a being helping other beings be. What about yourself, though? Tell me about you and the services that you offer and what you're here to do.
Okay, sure. Yeah. And that all sounds amazing, by the way. I'm just like hearing all of what you're providing, and I'm like, oh, I know a bunch of people that would benefit from that I want to send your way. Just knowing
Yeah.
how sacred of a container you hold for people's healing and just how much you see them. And so, yeah, that's really beautiful what you do, and you have a lot of really amazing content to help people grow and learn on TikTok as well. So people that are here on Instagram, that's where we'll be doing one of our next lives, just so you know, is over on TikTok. So if you don't follow us there, check it out and go follow us there so you can stay up to date with those lives too, where we talk about other topics. But anyway, yeah, what I do is I primarily do intuitive development training for people. I help people that are going through big changes and awakening in their life have the spiritual tools and support they need to transform their lives. And so I do one-on-one sessions, readings, and healings, but my maybe deepest love is working with people in my higher level containers, one of which is an intuitive training school where you learn how to have all these spiritual tools to read, to heal, and it's part of a bigger group of people. And then I have more of a mentorship program as well that's similar, where you're learning all the same tools, but there's more of a component of one-on-one sessions with me doing private healings and private group coaching too, to help integrate and kind of use it in your life. So I have two different paths, but they're essentially the same thing, just going about it in different ways. And so yeah, some people, they work with me once a year to get a reading, to get some insight, to see what's ahead of them and what could be useful to them. And some people, they work in that high-level mentorship where they're getting classes every month. They're getting, readings, healings, they're getting coaching, they're really getting just all the foundational work to be able to do this for themselves and live a really purposeful life here on Earth.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely know of a couple people, and even on TikTok, I'm excited to bring this chat to TikTok and to collaborate more and speak on these topics that really are really important today. So I'm excited. I'm excited for you, and I look forward to being a part of the school. I kind of want to be a part of it
Yeah,
and, expand, right? Why not? You're
please.
always, again, always a student, never a teacher. So I'm excited about that, and I'm happy that we connected, and it couldn't have been more of a perfect time, honestly. And thank you so much for taking time out for today and doing this with me and asking the questions and being open to talking as well. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, it's been a total joy. It's like instant best friends here.
Yeah.
It's so fun to talk with you. I'm like, we can just hang out all day, keep it live. We'll just keep this thing going for a few days and see what comes out of it.
Oh,
No,
TikTok would have a ball with that because
yeah.
there's no limits to the live. You could just continuously go live. I mean, the longest live I've done is 3 hours, but it was so much fun because there's just like a lot of energy in there.
Mm,
So they love that. The algorithm loves that.
that's awesome. Well, hey, I'm gonna be around your area soon, starting tonight, I guess. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. But either way, I'm sure we'll have some more conversations like this, dive into some other topics. I know there's just a huge amount of
Oh, yeah.
things that we tap into and work with on a day-to-day basis that are, like you said, really interesting and useful for this awakening world. People are really stepping into this, so I look forward to more. And thanks so much for being open to it and hosting it.
No, of course. Thank you so much. And again, if you guys don't know Brandon, you can check him out. I'll actually create a post and tag him on there. And thank you guys for being here and for listening to this. And thank you so much, Brandon, for being here. I appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with all of us. And yeah, I look forward to later on in the future connecting more.
Sounds great.
All right, we'll stay in touch then.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.